And I'm thrilled to announce today across California, all 58 counties, the California Death Penalty Reform and Savings Act of 2016 has submitted 593,000 signatures to place this measure on the ballot. And it's important. This is a very important measure as it will protect public safety and ensure crime victims and their families are given justice for the suffering they've endured by reforming the California death penalty laws so that sentences can be carried out appropriately and in rare cases where it's handed down. The measure will save taxpayers through reforms to death row inmate housing, streamline the appeals process, and require death row inmates to work, pay restitution to pay back to their victims or their victims' families. And it will maintain a string of safeguards to ensure due process is carried out for those protections for the accused, and those protections are maintained. Again, it will save taxpayers tens of thousands of dollars, or excuse me, tens of millions of dollars. The death penalty system and the court system is broken down, and this Reform Act will help restore the efficiencies to the process and help bring justice and hold those criminals accountable that have done heinous crimes throughout California. I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Siskiyou County Sheriff John Lopey at this time.
I think that what we're talking about here is justice denied the victims of these heinous crimes is an injustice. And also I'd like to add that I think it's important to remember that since 1978 we've only executed about 13 inmates, and they're about less than 1% of the worst murderers in the state of California. Now, some of the things that will result if this measure is passed is expanding the pool of available defense attorneys so death penalty appeals can proceed quickly, requiring that a defendant who is sentenced to death is appointed a lawyer at the time of his sentence, because oftentimes it takes more than 5 years just to get an attorney. And also it will reduce the time within which a case can be adjudicated. Instead of 20 to 30 years, this act should actually result in a death penalty sentence being executed within 10 to 15 years. It also allows the Department of Corrections to house condemned inmates in less costly housing. Currently they're in a death row. This would allow them to be distributed throughout the general population, and also would require them to work so that they could pay restitution to victims that deserve some type of a compensation for their crimes. It also requires that condemned inmates work and again pay restitution, which again I think that should be emphasized very heavily. It allows the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation to enact an execution protocol without having to reply to every question or suggestion by any citizen who sends them a letter, which really bogs down the review process. And it gives the California Supreme Court oversight over the state agency that manages death penalty appeals. And again, as a sheriff and as an advocate for victims, this act is very, very important, and I think it would be a landmark law that will not only be more merciful to victims and will honor victims, but actually is more humane for inmates as well, because then they won't wait 20 or 30 years to receive a disposition on their case. And another thing I want to emphasize again, we're talking about the very worst. Less than 1% of murder suspects that are convicted in court, less than 1%, the very worst. The serial killers, the child killers, the cop killers. And again, we're just looking for justice for the victims and a better system within which to manage these cases. Thank you very much.
This act is very much needed to restore the death penalty changes within our system and help restore offender accountability and justice for the victims and their families that have endured these persons sitting on death row without the sentence being delivered.